The document came to light in 2019, hidden inside the wall of a demolished plantation house in Beaufort County, South Carolina. Construction workers discovered it wrapped tightly in oilcloth. The ink was faded but still readable. It was a letter written in 1831 by a white overseer named Edmund Hale to his brother in Charleston. The letter described something that frightened him so deeply he never mailed it. Instead, he hid it where he believed no one would ever find it while he lived. "There is a Negro here," Hale wrote, "who knows things he should not know. He speaks of events before they occur. The slaves believe he carries the spirits of his ancestors in his blood. I have whipped him until my arm ached, and still he looks at me with eyes that seem to see through time itself. I fear this man, William. I fear him more than any living thing." According to plantation records compared with Hale's letter, the man was listed only as Jim in the ledger. But that was not his true name. His real name was Jabari Mansa. What happened to him represents one of the most carefully erased stories in American history. Jabari did not resist slavery through escape or open violence. He resisted in a way far more dangerous to the system that enslaved him. He refused to let them take his mind. What you are about to hear was buried for almost 200 years. Records were destroyed, witnesses were silenced, and the story itself was treated as too dangerous to preserve. But fragments survived: court files, auction receipts, letters like Hale's that were hidden instead of burned, and testimony from formerly enslaved people recorded decades after emancipation by researchers who understood that oral history often carried truths official records tried to erase. When these fragments are put together, they reveal something plantation owners in the 1800s understood but could never say out loud. The most dangerous enslaved person was not the one who ran away or fought back, but the one who remembered. Jabari Mansa arrived in Charleston Harbor in August 1807, 1 month before the law banning the importation of enslaved Africans officially took effect in the United States. The ship was the Henrietta Marie, a Portuguese vessel sailing under Spanish registry to avoid British patrols. Records show that 312 Africans boarded the ship on the coast of present-day Senegal. Only 127 survived the journey. The rest were thrown into the sea, their bodies feeding sharks that followed slave ships across the Atlantic. But the story does not begin there. It begins 37 years later, in 1844, in the woods outside Beaufort, when Jabari did something that triggered 3 separate court investigations and later helped inspire laws meant to ensure no one could ever do it again. The event involved 12 enslaved people from different plantations who met in secret on a Sunday night. What they did at that meeting depends on who told the story. White authorities claimed it was a voodoo ritual meant to curse plantation owners. Enslaved people said it was a lesson that Jabari was passing on knowledge that had to survive. Everyone agreed on one fact. After that night, 2 white men who discovered the gathering slowly lost their sanity. They spoke in languages they had never learned and described places they had never been. They could not tell their own memories apart from visions of events that had not yet happened. The courts called it hysteria. Enslaved people called it justice. Jabari Mansa, when questioned under torture about what he had done, said only this: "I showed them what we remember. And memory is a weapon they cannot take." To understand what he meant, you must understand where Jabari came from and what he carried with him. Something more dangerous to slavery than any blade or gun. The Wolof Empire in what is now Senegal kept an oral tradition that stretched back hundreds of years. They had griots, master storytellers who memorized the full history of kingdoms, family lineages, and knowledge gathered across generations. These men were not entertainers, they were living libraries. Their minds held information that would take years to write down. The Wolof kept this knowledge oral on purpose. Written records could be destroyed or changed. Trained human memory, disciplined and protected, was harder to erase. Jabari's grandfather had been a griot, not of the highest rank, but respected enough that his family held status. They were not royalty, but they were not laborers either. They belonged to the social group that European traders found most profitable, educated enough to be valuable, but not powerful enough to be protected. When French and Portuguese traders built forts along the Senegalese coast, they paid local chiefs to supply captives from this exact group. Jabari was 17 when the raiders came. It was not a random attack, it was business. A local chief, whose name history chose to forget, had signed a contract to provide 50 young men to a Portuguese trader named Valentim da Silva. The contract listed ages, health, and physical condition. Payment came in cloth, rum, and iron bars. Jabari was taken during the dry season while trading near the coast. 6 young men were captured with him, all from families with some education or skill. They were held in a stone fortress built to store human beings like goods. During 3 weeks there, Jabari watched people break in different ways. Some went silent, some became violent. Most observed, memorizing details and trying to understand the system that had swallowed them. There he met an older man named Boubacar, a griot of higher rank than Jabari's grandfather. Boubacar had been sold by rivals to remove his influence. He understood something Jabari was only beginning to see. They were not just stealing bodies, they were trying to erase cultures and histories. Boubacar told Jabari that they would try to make him forget his name, his language, and who he had been. But memory, he said, was the only weapon that survived every form of cruelty. Before Boubacar died, he made Jabari promise to remember everything, including Boubacar's own name and lineage. Jabari memorized it all. When the Henrietta Marie sailed, Jabari carried entire histories in his mind that no one aboard knew existed. The middle passage was as brutal as every account describes. Jabari was chained for 11 weeks. The ship's surgeon kept calm, detailed notes that listed deaths like numbers on a page. What those logs did not record was what happened inside the minds of the captives. Jabari survived by reciting memories over and over, exercising his mind. The way a runner trains legs. When he finished his own memories, he recited Boubacar's. Then he memorized new things, faces, routines, sounds. Others noticed. A woman named Aminata joined him, sharing her own memories of trade routes and family history. They shared knowledge so that if one died, the other would carry both stories forward. When the ship reached Charleston, Jabari was weak but alive. After recovery, he was sold at Ryan's Mart and purchased by a rice planter named Marcus Whitfield. Plantation records listed him simply as Negro Jim, no known skills. What followed was quiet resistance. Jabari worked, but he watched and learned. He held his gaze when beaten, refusing to show surrender. At night, he taught others their true names, their histories, and how to remember. Over years, his teaching spread. Children born on the plantation learned stories of Africa, languages, and the truth that their condition was not natural or deserved. This was what terrified overseers when they finally noticed. Education broke the system's grip more effectively than force. Jabari was eventually sold again and marched west in a coffle. During that journey, he memorized the lives of 43 people and taught them how to preserve their own memories. Many would die young, but their names did not vanish entirely. Someone remembered. On a massive Alabama cotton plantation, Jabari used his knowledge to save lives and gain a small measure of protection. He became known as someone who understood illness and heat, knowledge learned long before he was enslaved. Through all of this, his resistance remained the same. He remembered. He taught others to remember. And in doing so, he carried something slavery could never fully destroy, the truth of who they were. This role gave Jabari something priceless, access to nearly every enslaved person on the plantation, and moments to speak with them alone. These talks happened during medical visits. Jabari would be checking someone for malaria or cleaning an infected wound. As he worked, he spoke softly. "What is your name? Your true name, not the one they gave you. Where were you born? Do you remember your mother's name?" He memorized everything they shared, adding it to the mental record he had been building since 1807. But he did more than collect stories. He taught the same memory skills he had created earlier. "The stories you remember, teach them to your children," he said. "Say the names of your ancestors out loud when you are alone so you don't lose them. They want to erase who we were before they took us. Do not let them." By 1820, Jabari had been on Crawford's plantation for 6 years and had formed another network of cultural preservation involving at least 50 people. They met in small groups during Sunday rest time, officially for Christian worship, but in reality they were learning African history, language, and ways to protect identity. The cover worked well. White owners encouraged slave Christianity. "Thank you," believing it made people more obedient. They never imagined enslaved people would use church gatherings to protect the very culture Christianity was meant to replace. Samuel Crawford, however, noticed something troubling in 1821. Older African-born slaves seemed to be teaching something to younger American-born ones. Children who had grown up speaking only English began using African words. Enslaved people who should have been completely broken showed something different, not open rebellion, but pride, or at least the absence of total defeat. Crawford could not trace this directly to Jabari, but he knew something was wrong. In 1822, Crawford imposed new rules: no gatherings of more than 5 enslaved people outside supervised work, no private talks during Sunday services, random searches of slave quarters to ensure nothing forbidden was being taught or kept. These rules slowed Jabari's work but did not stop it. The network adjusted, meetings became smaller, teaching became quieter. They developed coded language that sounded like Christian talk to white listeners. The Kingdom of Our Fathers meant West African empires. The Crossing meant the Middle Passage, the time before captivity. Meant life in Africa. Overseers heard Bible talk and missed the history hidden inside it. In 1825, a Methodist minister named Reverend Thomas Whitmore began visiting plantations to preach to enslaved people. Whitmore believed slavery was God's will, but also believed enslaved people had souls that needed saving. He traveled from plantation to plantation teaching scripture. His visits created an opening Jabari saw immediately. Whitmore wanted enslaved people to read the Bible. Whitmore ran literacy classes for slaves whose owners allowed it. Samuel Crawford, a devoted Methodist, allowed about 20 enslaved people to attend, including Jabari. This choice would become one of Crawford's worst mistakes. Jabari learned to read with intense focus, fully aware of how powerful literacy could be. Slave systems kept people illiterate for a reason. Reading allowed access to ideas, news, and organization. Whitmore believed literate slaves would accept Bible verses about obedience and suffering. He did not expect them to also read Exodus, the prophets who condemned injustice, or Jesus speaking about freedom for captives. By 1827, Jabari read fluently. More importantly, he could secretly teach others. The skill spread slowly and carefully. Discovery meant punishment. Within 3 years, about 30 enslaved people on Crawford's plantation could read. That alone was terrifying. Then Jabari took another step. He began writing everything down, not on paper that could be seized, but in places white people never checked, on walls with charcoal that could be erased, inside buildings where freed people might someday find it. He taught other literate slaves to do the same. Together, they created a scattered archive of memory across the plantation. These writings listed names, family lines, memories of Africa, and something even more dangerous. They recorded violence, dates of beatings, names of people sold away, sexual abuse by overseers. This was no longer just cultural memory. This was evidence. In 1831, Nat Turner led a rebellion in Virginia that killed about 60 white people. The response across the South was panic. Laws became harsher. Surveillance increased. Education was crushed. New laws banned teaching enslaved people to read or write. Whitmore's classes ended at once. Searches intensified. In 1832, during one of these searches, an overseer found writing on a storage building wall. It was in English. Names, dates, punishments, proof of long-term violence. The investigation that followed was brutal. Every enslaved person was questioned under torture. Several died without giving answers. Authorities believed an outside agitator must be responsible. They could not accept that enslaved people had done this themselves. Samuel Crawford suspected Jabari. He ordered him brought in. Court records describe what happened next. For 3 hours, Crawford, Jacob Reeves, and 2 others tried to force a confession using beatings, threats, and pressure. Jabari responded the way he always had. He remembered. When asked who wrote the records, Jabari looked at Crawford and said words preserved exactly in court documents. "I wrote nothing, but I remember everything. Every name, every beating, every child taken, every woman abused, every man worked to death. I carry it here." He pointed to his head. "You can burn paper, you cannot burn memory." The room went silent. What frightened them was not defiance but the meaning of his claim. A living archive could not be destroyed without killing him, and he had taught others. Reeves later wrote that if this was true, they faced a threat greater than rebellion, witnesses who would testify someday. Crawford sold Jabari immediately, hoping removal would contain the damage. In 1832, Jabari was sold again, now in his early 40s. Despite age, his knowledge kept his value high. He was purchased by George Bellamy near Beaufort. Bellamy believed in what he called scientific slave management. He was told Jabari was dangerous because of his intelligence. Instead of fearing that, Bellamy was curious. He questioned Jabari regularly about African culture and resistance, planning to write a guide on controlling slaves. Jabari used this to his advantage. He mixed truth with lies, telling Bellamy Africans could not plan deeply, that proper routines prevented resistance, that Christianized slaves lost African identity. Bellamy relaxed. Meanwhile, Jabari rebuilt his network among the enslaved. This time, he added something new. He taught people how to turn memory into testimony. Drawing on griot traditions, he showed them how to tell their stories with rhythm, clarity, and emotional force, not just facts, but feeling. The goal was to create witnesses who could make listeners truly understand slavery. The 12 people who met Jabari in the woods near Beaufort in 1844 were practicing this. They were not performing magic, they were rehearsing testimony. 2 white brothers, Daniel and William Harding, overheard them while hunting. They listened, as people described their lives with overwhelming detail. Court records show Daniel Harding said he felt sick hearing a mother describe losing her children, the sounds of crying, the pain that remained. Another man described the slave ship so vividly Daniel felt he was there. Afterward, both brothers suffered severe mental effects. Daniel had intrusive memories that were not his own. William's condition worsened. He spoke languages he never learned and believed himself enslaved. Doctors had no explanation. White communities panicked. If enslaved people could force whites to feel slavery through words alone, the system was threatened. 3 investigations followed. One looked for poison or witchcraft and found none. Another, by doctors, admitted trauma could be transferred through vivid description. A third, by lawmakers, concluded this was a threat to public order. New laws followed in 1845. Teaching memory systems was banned. Meetings were restricted. Intelligent enslaved people were to be sold or separated. Bellamy faced pressure to punish Jabari publicly. He refused. In a letter, he wrote that killing Jabari would make him a martyr. Instead, he sold him to Edmund Hale, owner of a small plantation with 20 enslaved people. Jabari was now in his mid-50s. He had endured decades of violence and loss. On Hale's tightly watched plantation, he changed tactics again. He taught a private practice done alone, unnoticed. He taught people how to sit quietly and witness their memories without being destroyed by them. Remember the pain, but do not let it define you. Observe it, name it, hold distance. This allowed people to keep joy and hope alongside memory. Hale noticed something wrong. His slaves worked, but they were not broken. They carried dignity. His letter to his brother, found in 2019, came from this fear. He wrote that Jabari made him feel judged by history, that the slaves were free in mind, that he could not break what he could not touch. Hale dreamed of being enslaved himself. He believed Jabari had cursed him, but realized the curse was empathy. Within a year, Hale freed everyone on his plantation, sold his land, and moved north as an abolitionist. Jabari was freed in 1846 at age 56. He spent his final years teaching, organizing, and preserving memory. When he died in 1864, hundreds attended his funeral. People stood and recited names, histories, and testimony he had taught them. White observers were terrified. Letters reveal fear that enslaved people had kept records all along. Soon after, records were destroyed, stories suppressed. But the memory network survived. Today, Jabari's story matters because it proves memory can outlast oppression, that witnessing is resistance, and that truth, once shared widely enough, cannot be erased forever.